Hi, this is me, Basha, and you're watching a tutorial on how to make a ring with a bezel for your cabochon gemstone and how to set it. So, let's jump right in. Pick a gemstone of your choice. Make sure the back is flat and even, which makes the setting process much easier. Step 1. Pick a bezel wire. Fine silver will be much softer than sterling silver. Step 2. Check the height of the bezel wire. Ideally, it should be going over the edge of the gemstone a little bit. If the top curve of your gemstone is higher, you want the bezel wire to go just a bit over the curve. Otherwise, there will be too much silver that will be hard to fit snugly around the gemstone. In my case, I will need to cut a thinner bezel wire or make a step for my gemstone to place it inside of the bezel to elevate it. I think I will go for the step. Step 3. Fitting the wire around the stone. My bezel wire is a bit thicker, so I'm cutting a smaller piece after measuring the stone with the paper tape and annealing the wire to make it softer. It will be easier to wrap it around my gemstone. You can use stamps if you'd like to create your own decorative bezel wire. I'm adding these stamps after annealing while my metal is softer. I will anneal it once more to make it softer after stamping, and then I will wrap it around my gemstone. You can use half-round pliers to help with shaping the wire. Once you're sure about the shape, mark the metal where it overlaps and cut it. Make sure you're cutting a straight line. Don't cut too much, it's better to leave a bit of excess so you can adjust it. If you cut it too small, your wire won't fit around the gemstone and you'll have to repeat your work. Step 4. Align the edges and make sure they are flush. There should be no light coming through the gap. If they are not flush, use file, for example a handy nail file, to even out the edges. Once they close well, you can move to the next step. Step 5. Soldering. Add flax of your choice. Here I'm using Smart Flax by Pepetools, and add a piece of silver solder. Because there will be more soldering, I will start with hard solder for this join. Be careful with the flame. Start by going around and inside of the bezel and try not to point the flame directly at the metal. Once it's hot enough for the solder to flow, you can quickly point it at the seam in a hit and run motion to make the solder flow. This is especially important with smaller and thinner bezels because you don't want to melt them. You can quench and pickle your bezel after soldering, then dry it out. Get ready for next step. Step 6. Fit your bezel around the gemstone and check the fit. Does your gemstone fit in there with no problems? It shouldn't be too tight that you have to use force to push your cabochon in. You also don't want to have extra space inside. It should be just right and your stone shouldn't move. When fitting the bezel, make sure you put the gemstone in the bezel, not the bezel over the gemstone. It's because while setting, you will be placing the gem in the bezel from the top. Step 7. Soldering bezel onto the backplate. My bezel fits well, so now I'm going to take a silver sheet, this one is 0.5 millimeter thick, and I will continue making a bezel setting. I'm cutting the sheet to the size I need. And then checking the fit once again. I'm sanding the bottom of the bezel using sanding paper to make sure that there are no gaps between the wire and the backplate. I'm placing it on the wire mesh on my charcoal block and adding flux and solder. The mesh will elevate the metal so I can heat it up from below. Charcoal block reflects the heat and is great for soldering. Again, making sure I'm not overheating the metal and placing my flame around it and underneath my bezel. It's okay to point the flame at the metal, but it's best to use quick movements to heat it up. And there it is, solder flows, joining the elements together. quenching and pickling after soldering. Step 8. Cutting and sanding the bezel. The piece is now white after being cleaned in the pickling solution. The one I use is the Smart Pickling Powder by Pepetools. It gets the job done well and fast. I'm using my jeweler's saw to cut off the excess metal. Make sure to not cut too closely to the bezel wall so that you're not removing too much of the backplate by accident. After it's done, it's time for the files and sanding sticks. I use them to sand and smooth out the edge. Be careful not to remove the stamping. And here's our finished bezel before it's soldered onto the ring. You can check the fit again, but this time use floss to make sure you're able to remove the gemstone out of the bezel. Step 9. Making a ring. I'm going to go for a simple ring band with a textured finish, but without any extra details. I have this pre-made ring band, so I'm going to use it in this project. It's made with the sterling silver wire, 6 mm wide and 1 mm thick. First, I'm cutting off the excess. And now I need to reshape it. You can use a ring mandrel and a rawhide mallet for that, or a ring bending tool. This one is by Pepetools. The shape is ready, and it's a size 675. I'm making the gap even bigger, and I will leave it slightly open. The edges will be soldered onto the back of the bezel. Step 10. Fitting the ring band and soldering onto the bezel. The edges of the ring aren't flat, so I need to file them down and make sure they're even. You can use coarse files or sanding sticks for that. It helps to keep the ring still in the ring clamp. To make sure the ring band is soldered symmetrically, I'm going to use this clever center finder. I mark the metal with a pencil, and this way I'll know where to place the ring band. Now the fit is perfect, so I'm going to solder everything together. Same principles as before, but this time I will need some extra tools to keep the ring band in the place while soldering. Adding some flax to avoid the fire stain on the metal. Again, I am making sure to heat up the metal evenly and not overheat it until the solder flows. Here we go! Now everything is soldered together. Quench and pickle just like before. Step 11. Cleaning and polishing. It's time to clean the entire piece after soldering and prepare it for polishing. For this, I'm going to use my pendant motor with a flex shaft and various attachments, which speeds up the process. You can also use wet and dry papers, bathing sticks, and polishing papers. I'm going to use these bristle wheels from the coarse one to the finest one. Here's how it looks like after polishing. If there are any details on your ring, you can use patina to bring them out and add some dimension. That's what I did here. I used Platino patina and added it onto the stamped area. Here's how it looks like after polishing. Step 12. Setting the stone. It's time to set our stone in the bezel. I've placed the step inside using a wire, and now I'm putting the cabochon in. Depending on the gemstone you use, you might need to be more or less careful, and some gemstones like opal or lepidolite could break or chip if you put too much pressure on them. So just be careful because some stones are more fragile and soft. So take some steps to prevent this from happening. I'm going to cover my gem with a protective tape so that I don't accidentally scratch it. I'm going to gently start pushing the bezel with my bezel pusher. This is a thicker bezel, so we'll see if I will need to use some additional tools. Now, here's how you go about closing the bezel around the gem. You start on the opposite sides. Push on the left side and then on the right one, then at the top and next at the bottom. I'm calling the sides like that just for the reference, of course, but you know what I mean. Keep the opposite sides while moving around the gem. push lightly because you'll come back to it in a second when you'll use a bit more force. Alright, with this thicker bezel, I'm actually going to need help from additional tools. I'm going to use a hammer handpiece to help me with the bezel. I'm using it with the rotary tool and the benchtop speed control on the lowest speed. Gently applying it around the bezel and making sure I'm not damaging the stone and not leaving too many unnecessary marks on the metal. I'm going to use the ring clamp now, so it's easier to move and turn the ring while setting. You can also use ball vise, it makes the job much easier. After closing the walls around the gemstone, I am now going to go and make sure that the bezel is closed snugly and evenly without any gaps, and that the gemstone is not moving. Okay, that looks great. Step 13. Finishing. Now it's time to smooth out the bezel and give the ring a final polish. For that you can use burnishing tools. I'm using these two Eve silicone attachments that are safe on most of the gemstones. Coarser one will sand the edge, removing all of the scratches. Finer one will smooth it out and pre-polish it. Then I will use more attachments to polish up the bezel. Now I'm giving it a final polish with the benchtop polisher. And here it is, the final effect and a finished ring. Which step is usually the hardest or easiest for you? Did this video help you? Let me know in the comments. And watch this video next to learn more about making a bezel.